Hello, welcome to People in Perspective. I'm Nick Fucinato. Today I'm interviewing Joe Dvorak, who's an attorney and went to RB from 1961 to 1965. Hello, Joe.
Good morning.
I wanted to ask you, what was RB like back in 1960?
Okay, the buildings were a little bit smaller. Since I've left the school here, they built to the east, to the west, and a little bit over the entranceway is different than it was. You came in the center of the building, now you come around with the parking lot. The school was much bigger, I would say. I think when I graduated, it was over 1,700 students. Our graduating class was 500, and from that point on, it went even farther up. So it was bigger that way.
Oh, yeah. What was the people like in RB? Was there different groups or just one group of people?
Well, you had the different groups. You had the ones that were in sports, because the size of the school, not everybody was in sports. But even if you weren't in sports, you got along just as well with if you weren't, you know. And it was basically, there was no real problems. Students will always be students. They're just a little bit different. They dressed maybe a little bit different. They required button-down shirts for fellas and khakis, and for women, they had to have dresses that did not go above the knee. And we had a dean of women that would check that out. So that's maybe a little bit different.
How were the events? Were there a lot of room in the main gym and the football stadium?
Were there a lot of events in those places? Yeah, we used to have a pep rally every Friday in the gym. Then, of course, there were the dances there, like you have today. The football stadium was basically a football stadium. No soccer was played in those days, and the football games were on Saturday, not Friday night, and we didn't have any night games. There was no lights in the stadium.
How were the teachers at RB back then?
We thought they were tough, but they were good. You know, it provided a great education. We had many good faculty members on the staff, and ones that were concerned, that some of them I still see around town, living in the village and all that. And one in particular, my daughter had in school, when I also had the same one, and he taught basically the same way. So it was interesting.
Did you have any favorite teachers when you went to RB?
Oh, I think there were quite a few, and just to name a few, one that I said my daughter even had, and maybe comes to mind right away, was Mr. Abrahamson, who retired just a few years ago. And I had him for a couple courses. He was a new teacher when he came the first year that I had him. He just was out of college, and he changed over the years. And so when we came here for Parents' Evening, I said, well, you know, he used to write all over the blackboard, and you would not, which you don't have today, but blackboard then, it won't be that way now. Well, he handled himself the same way. Just a good, you know, you had to learn from him. Yeah. So I had about 2 or 3 courses from him. And there were others too. I don't like to pick out one, but that one I remember. Yeah.
So I know you're an attorney at law, and how did you decide to become a lawyer?
Well, I think both my mom and dad were attorneys, and not that I think, but they were. And I sort of was around law all the time. And so even though they didn't really say I should go into law, I always had a feeling to go that way. And just all along, the courses I even took here were sort of involved. There was a business law course, and then on to college, and taught or took classes that sort of got me ready to go to law school.
Why did you just decide to make your law office in Riverside?
I had my office downtown for about 20 years before venturing out to Riverside. And just because so many of my clients were out in the western suburbs, And then I had a deputy fire chief from Chicago when I decided maybe I was going to move to the suburbs, and I called him up and said, we need to get back in the office here and sign your documents before I go to the suburbs. He said, even though I'm from Chicago, I'd rather come out to the suburbs, so call me when you get there. So that was a thing that really made the reason why I moved out there. And since that time, I would never move back.
So you're on the Alumni Achievement Committee, I know. And what does it exactly do?
Basically, it goes out, and we're always looking for people to be, to send their resume to us, or people that know people that should, because we always are looking for some. Initially, we had quite a few, but what we go and find out people who have done something beyond just becoming just a normal, hardworking individual. We've had people that were in the medical field, doctors' fields, a person who was just recently a helicopter pilot, both in Afghanistan and Iraq, but also was the presidential pilot for the president. I think it was Bush at the time.
When do you meet for the committee?
We meet about 3-4 times a year. We'll probably they just had the awards, so we'll probably have a meeting beginning in January or February, and then we'll meet later on after we look at the resumes of everybody, then we meet to pick which ones we're going to pick. We generally pick anywhere between 3 and 4. Because then we invite them back, and they're supposed to give a little speech about what they do.
So you brought yearbooks with you to show us, and
right.
I have one picture of the football stadium in 1963, and it's really, the stadium really changed. It looks like it looks smaller and more simpler than the one we have today, and there's a fence I see in the front right here.
Well, that was going down to the field, I think. So but no, basically that's the same, and then you have those extensions on the sides, and then across the way. But I think just the way the picture was developed, it was that way. I think they were focusing more on the players. But that's the way they used to fill the stadium pretty well, just like you do now.
So you have your senior picture in this yearbook, right?
Now I didn't mark it. Yes. Yeah. I should be able to find it real fast here. I haven't looked at these in several years. Right here.
Show the right camera. That's you in your senior year.
That's correct.
How many people were in your class in senior year?
I would say over 500 graduated.
It's a good amount of people.
Yes. So the school was pretty filled. I mean, when you had changes of classes, you had the halls were filled.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us today, Joe. And
thank you.
I'm Fucinato, and thank you for joining us on People in Perspective.